Good afternoon and welcome into the Senate Committee on Government Operations meeting of Wednesday, February 12th. We have three items on the agenda today. And we'll begin with a visit from the Vermont Association of County Judges. And with us virtually is Joyce McKeeman, who's the president of the Vermont Association of County Judges. Welcome in, Joyce, and for your benefit, two of our committee members are not here yet. One of them will be joining us virtually, I think, as well, and the other, I'm sure, will join us momentarily. I'm Brian Collmore, chair of the committee and represent the Rutland District, and I'll let Senator Clarkson to finish that one bite of her, I'm sure, delicious.
Hello, Joyce. Good to see you.
Nice to see you, Senator. Thank you.
It's lovely to see you. And you should know it's Creative Economy and Vermont Outdoor Recreation Day in the State House. So there are a lot of constituents here. So we apologize for people being late, but it's one of those busy days. Winter
no apologies necessary. No problem.
I'd like you to meet our committee assistant, Jillian, and our final senator who's here at the moment.
Tanya Bihovsky, Chittenden Central District.
Right.
Joined
Nice
by
to see you again.
Senator White from Windsor and also Senator Larry Hart from the Orange District at some point. So we have about a half an hour planned, Joyce, and the floor is yours, as they say.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Chairman Collmore. Did I say that right?
You did, yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. I try real hard to get names right, and to the other committee members who are there. And my new senator, Senator Hart, who I have not met yet, looking forward to meeting him sometime. So I hope he comes in before too long. So thank you very much. I don't have a big agenda. I don't think that I've been alerted that there's any proposed legislation that involves us. But thank you for giving me the chance to come and talk about the state's 28 independently elected assistant judges, as well as simply being an advocate for county government in general. I don't have any formal role in advocating for county government, but because I'm out and about and speaking about assistant judges, I always give a shout out to the fact that even though in Vermont county government is quite thin, it exists. And also that all county officers, including state's attorneys, probate judges, sheriffs, and assistant judges, are elected every 4 years. And I wish there was a way to put more of a spotlight on those offices, just so that people know, what they might look for when they're voting for those candidates. I think we're too down ballot. I'm sorry, was there a question, Senator Clarkson?
Yes, go ahead, Senator Clarkson.
Joyce, did you participate in this summer's county governance, regional governance task force?
I did not. I was informed that it was happening, but I was not invited to participate in any way. I understood that the list of participants had sort of a ballooned, but no, unfortunately, I wasn't asked to participate in that.
So and I'm sorry that Senator Hart isn't here because it's always a learning experience to be able to visualize the structural system that we have in terms of the judiciary. But for my benefit, let's just say, if you can tell us exactly what the county judges, or as you call them, assistant judges, because I think there are other ways to reference them, assigned judges perhaps, or something like that. Tell us how that is set up. And I didn't realize, actually, now that I think about it, I do remember in my own district, they have 2-year longer terms than we do. So
Right.
They're pulling out sign waving or whatever they choose to do during the election season every other year, as far as we're concerned.
They're lucky dogs.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
that's an easier way to say it. Yeah.
Well, and my understanding is that, I mean, for example, it's well known that for many years, the governor was elected for a 4-year term. I can only suspect that county government is these 4-year terms for all of the elected county officers are just a vestige of what might have been way in the past. But state's attorneys, sheriffs, probate judges, and the assistant judges are all 4-year terms, right? So we're all up for reelection next year, 2026. Yeah, 2026. And yes, I feel very fortunate. So let me just talk specifically about the Office of Assistant Judges. That's the way it's referred to in statute. It is a constitutional office. We've existed since the founding of Vermont. However, our duties are statutory. So our existence is constitutional, but our duties are statutory. And as I have already mentioned at length, we're elected every 4 years, 2 from each county. So we have a completely bifurcated set of responsibilities. On one hand, we are the county executives. That even though there are very few county duties left, care and custody and maintenance of the county courthouse where those still exist, and we don't have them in every county any longer, but that is under the purview of the assistant judges. And right now, the judiciary is our only tenant. So the assistant judges with county courthouses are tasked with keeping those, for the most part, very old buildings. My own building dates to 1847 and is not the oldest courthouse. We've got to keep those buildings functioning for 21st century judiciary functions. And I hope that, I don't hope, I know that my colleagues around the state have moved from an era of perhaps penny pinching frugality regarding their facilities to now understanding that the judiciary requires a well-functioning building. So it may seem like a small thing, but it's really important to the access to justice for the citizens around the state. We also have statutory authority to fund basic overhead operations for sheriff's departments. So we don't get into the law enforcement side of that, but for example, still, I don't have the number right in front of me, many counties still own, as we do in Orange County, the building the sheriff operates out of. But we are responsible for their basic overhead, heat, lights, snow plowing, telephone service, internet service, training for officers, there's a whole list of things. So we oversee a county budget, the assistant judges, for those purposes. And so we put together that budget, and that the county budgets are assessed to the towns based on their grand lists. So it is a property tax. We're not unaware of that. And then the other side of our duties are the judicial side. And these used to be in days of yore quite expansive. For example, assistant judges used to be able to sit on criminal jury trials and would have some say in sentencing. That's quite a ways in the past, but it was still active in the 20th century at least. That's been whittled back, and now we have jurisdiction to sit on family and civil dockets, and we function as finders of fact. So we're really like a little 2-person jury. So just what a jury does on a criminal trial, where you have to determine who's telling the truth, what do you think really happened, and it's the jury who decides, did that person do the thing that they are accused of? The assistant judges working with the presiding judge work together on making all of those determinations. And then the presiding judge is tasked with applying the law to that. And then beyond that, and again, for people who, are sort of new to learning about assistant judges, we have a unified traffic court adjudication system in Vermont called the Judicial Bureau, and assistant judges, I'm one of 2 currently trained to sit as traffic court judges. So we've got 4 people trained. One is a probate judge, one is a full-time hearing officer in the Judicial Bureau, and 2 assistant judges. So the 4 of us take care of the traffic citation, civil violations, because it's a little bit more than traffic. It includes some fish and wildlife violations, a variety of things that the legislature decides over the years are not criminal and they don't know where to park them. So they're given to Judicial Bureau to enforce if somebody receives a citation. So that's kind of in a nutshell what we do. And I'm happy to answer any questions. I can, the committee members who have heard me before know that I can easily talk about this for a long time, but I want to make sure that I give people a chance to ask any questions if they have them.
So you don't get involved in any criminal cases, correct?
Right. We have no jurisdiction any longer on criminal cases. The only way, yeah,
When did
I'm sorry.
that change? When did that change, Joyce?
I don't know really. I have a sense that it was still happening post-war, because I remember seeing a case written up with some controversy about assistant judges weighing in on sentencing. But frankly, I don't know that for a fact. And I'd have to look into that. But no, I mean, so for example, sometimes on post-conviction relief cases, where somebody who's been convicted wants to challenge some aspect, usually of sentencing or probation, but that then works its way and that becomes a civil case once it comes into the Superior Court on post-conviction relief. So we're no longer there, technically on a criminal matter.
Also, you mentioned, and I feel like I'm at a huge disadvantage, that at one point the governor had a 4-year term. I don't ever remember that, but I'm not 250 years old either.
Well, I moved to Vermont in 1990, so I'm not truly a Vermonter. But I remember tripping across a reference to that at some point. It changed from a 4-year to a 2-year term. But again, I didn't come armed with those citations. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, if you're correct, I feel like I wasn't informed accurately. My sort of history of the state is that at one point it was divided kind of on an east-west geographical delineation, and it was understood that for whatever the term was, and I always thought it was 2 years. For 2 years, the governor would come from the western part of the state, and then the next 2 years it would come from the eastern part, and that was sort of just understood, and it would go back and forth on occasion.
We'll find out from Tucker.
I Googled it, and it seems that actually prior to having 2-year terms, the Vermont governors had 1-year terms.
Yeah, I'm not sure they ever had 4-year terms.
I don't think so either.
Okay, well, my
Well,
apologies if I got that little factoid wrong.
No, that's fine, Joyce. And again, I only asked because I went, wow, I never knew that. There's a lot of portraits in this building where, and it's funny because the plates that were, I don't think they were ever actually gold, but the gold plated, brass, would give the dates of that particular person's term. And I've never seen one that's longer than 2 years. So I could be wrong.
Well, look, I don't remember where I tripped across it. And so, I stand corrected until somebody digs in a little bit more, I guess.
No issues here. So you manage a budget. Where does that budget come from, and who approves it, and how are you financed?
We have statutory authority to tax the towns up to 5 cents per $100 of assessed valuation.
Okay.
I can tell you no county is even close to that. The Orange County rate for this fiscal year is 1.1 cent, so we're at a fraction. But having said that, that we could raise a lot of money if somebody taxed up to the full amount. So the budget process is in Title 24, all laid out. The assistant judges put together a budget for the support of the courthouse and for the sheriff's department. And then we have to hold 2 public hearings They're set by law in December and January. As you can imagine, they're not the best times of year for people to want to drive out to their county courthouse for a budget hearing. We've tried to switch to having them hybrid meetings so people don't have to drive, but we have to hold 2 meetings, but nobody votes on them. So there is a chance for the public to weigh in. And there is one Supreme Court case, Stowe v. Lamoille from 1976, that deals in some part with county budgeting because it was a challenge by the town of Stowe to certain aspects of the Lamoille County budget. And in that decision, and I don't have it in front of me, but I've read it so often, the justices do weigh in on the nature of this budgetary and tax authority, and essentially say that it is a responsibility so grave that assistant judges rightly should be kind of very careful with how they exercise it. And then, as I said, then the towns are assessed proportionally based on the grand list.
So as you point out, we no longer have a courthouse in each county, as we did at one point. I know in Rutland County, there is one. The sheriffs, though, are housed in a completely separate facility. And so you sort of have 2 tasks, I guess is the way I would put it. You oversee the courthouse itself, but you also have some judicial tasks as well. And I gotta think that you mentioned in Orange, it was 18 something, 50, 47, something like that. They're old, and I don't know that we have a new. Well, I guess Windsor might have a fairly new.
Woodstock, we're the Chinatown, and we just redid our courthouse about 10 years ago, and that is one thing every one of the side judges could be doing, is advocating for the renovation of their courthouses. I think every county does a courthouse. I don't. Who doesn't have a courthouse?
Addison no longer has a courthouse.
What
And Caledonia sold their courthouse to the state for $1. So the state now owns the Caledonia courthouse.
But where does Addison try their cases?
That state built a new courthouse in Middlebury.
But they do have a courthouse.
But it's not a county.
Absolutely. Oh, I'm sorry. They absolutely have a courthouse. I misunderstood your question.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
The original courthouse they don't have.
Right. There's no longer a county courthouse maintained by the county. Right. It's a state courthouse.
Oh, okay. Sort of like the criminal court in Windsor, which is state.
Correct.
It's
Correct.
not, and the only county one is the historic Shire town.
Correct. But the Windsor courthouse is, in White River Junction is being renovated, and they've moved almost all proceedings over to the courthouse in Woodstock.
I'm well aware. It's a block and a half from my house.
Yeah. So,
Very immediate.
and kudos to the assistant judges there. A number of years ago, floated a fairly significant bond issue to install an elevator and air conditioning and really bring that courthouse, sort of up to snuff. Now, some things still had to be modified in order to accept, a heavier load. And now that they're having criminal proceedings there, some things had to be rejiggered a little bit inside, I understand. But yeah, I mean, the assistant judges, we kind of paddle under, we're under the radar until something goes wrong. The Washington County Courthouse was flooded up to the first floor floorboards 2 summers ago in Montpelier, and they thought that they'd been spared, and then realized that the water had wicked up, and so that was not completely gutted. But the assistant judges were scrambling like everybody else in Montpelier to find, all of the flood remediation, and then folks to do that. They sort of worked 24/7 for months, just the 2 of them, to get the Washington County Courthouse back into operation. So, there's no big staff to help. The two of them did it, and it was a huge lift. I'm sure you can appreciate everybody, I mean, everybody who works in Montpelier knows how devastating that flood was.
So you mentioned earlier, Joyce, that you're not aware of any legislation that's in the works this year. Is there anything you can think of that this committee might be of assistance for you?
Thank you for that opportunity. I don't have anything right now. As you know, our colleagues in the judiciary are responsible for moving, laws having to do with the judiciary itself. I think that the counties are pretty well positioned at this point. I'm not feeling that we're having any pressing issues.
Okay.
Thanks to some of the money that came through with the COVID relief, the HVAC systems in the courthouses that didn't have them are being addressed. The judiciary's been a good partner in advocating on our behalf for money to, remediate the courthouses that needed some newer HVAC. So I think that we're in pretty good shape. I do think that some of the efforts and some of the motivations behind the impetus to move Proposition 1, which was the constitutional amendment, which failed, as we know, and I know it's not back on the table, but I think some of those issues regarding elected officials, especially at the county level, and what do you do if there's malfeasance, I think it's tricky, because if you have constitutional offices, the only remedy is impeachment. And we've seen that is not terribly feasible. And yet, on the other hand, having 4-year terms, I'm not asking you to change our length of our term. Please don't take it that way. But we're acutely sensitive to the fact that with 4-year terms, if someone says it's either impeachment or the ballot box to remove a bad apple, that those aren't maybe as swift as sometimes people might like. And I know that Prop 1 was looking at that possibly. So, but that's sort of in the past. I'm just sort of lending a little bit of support to some of the motivation around that. I don't think it was entirely misplaced, but as for right now, I think we're in very good shape. I certainly appreciate you're taking the time to invite me in. I'm always happy to talk about side judgery or county government. So I appreciate that very much.
Those that are dealing with the criminal cases seem to be still in a backlog situation. I don't think there's any secret about that. We were told, there were, I guess, statewide thousands of cases that still have yet to be adjudicated. You don't feel that same pressure at your job, then, that the traffic situation doesn't rise to that level?
No, and no, not at all. I mean, I think that there was a backlog of cases in Judicial Bureau for a while, but there isn't now. And frankly, I have to say that in Orange County, I don't get that sense of the backlog. I mean, the load of criminal cases falls very differently around the state. And I know that there are serious concerns about criminal backlogs in some jurisdictions. I don't see that I'm going to work in Chelsea every day. And if you haven't been to Chelsea, I invite everybody to come visit. So my own court is working very well. We have a single judge court in Chelsea, and yet we had a week set aside for jury trials this week, and they all settled. So we had no trials.
Have you been able to take advantage? Is it Odyssey? Is that I'm probably mislabeling that, but so do you have virtual capability?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
And I think it works great. I think it works really well. It's not without its problems. God knows, no technology is. But in fact, I think in a rural county like Orange County, where people have difficulty, keeping their cars on the road, there's a lot of poverty. The ability for people to get to a hearing, for example, a relief from abuse hearing or a divorce hearing, a status conference where maybe they don't have to miss half a day of work, they don't have to arrange childcare. I think that the WebEx, the Odyssey, that's the case filing system coupled with WebEx and virtual hearings, I think has really, in my view, increased access to justice. I understand, because I read about this, that especially the defense bar thinks that there are some access of justice issues in the criminal docket. But again, I'm not there seeing that. But in the dockets and family court, it's hard. We're dealing with tough issues with kids and families in disarray. People can be displaced from their homes very quickly in a relief from abuse action, and being able to avail themselves of remote hearings, I think really helps. And I will put a plug in that, in fact, it also saves the judiciary a lot, because, for example, if you have to have a judge from another court handle half a day's proceedings or something, they can do that remotely, and you're not asking people to be driving all over the state. So it's good for the environment, saves time. I think all of the headaches that come with the technology have been well worth it. And again, I'm not blind to the fact that the criminal docket has its own challenges.
Yeah. And I second your opinion on that. In Rutland County, and I'm sure in Orange, I think it's every couple of years, we have the ability for all the elected members of the General Assembly to have kind of a court day.
Right.
And we go and in Rutland, you have either the county courthouse or the criminal courthouse, and you sit and watch trials. And if you're lucky enough, and it's always happened to me, that the judge will call you into his or her chambers, and you'll be able to chat and find things. And I was struck by a couple of years ago, instead of being paper-based the way we were for hundreds of years, we did embrace this new technology. And when it didn't work, and it didn't work on occasion, things ground to a halt, and there was nothing anybody could do. Either the defendant wasn't there on the screen anymore, or for whatever reason, the judge was not able to look at documents that he or she needed to. But last time, this past year when we had it in Rutland, things are obviously, the bumps in the road have been straightened out, and things look pretty good. So yeah, it does lend itself to a much more convenient process, I think, for the most part. So does any other committee member want to weigh in, or? No? Okay. Well, I really appreciate your time today. It's a pleasure meeting you and hearing about the work that you do. And if there's ever anything that you can let us know that you need, please do.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. And please tell Senator Hart I hope to run into him soon, and I invite him to come over to Chelsea anytime.
Okay.
Well, and please give a big hello to Laurel.
I absolutely will. Yes.
Thank you, Joyce. Have a great day.
Thank you. You too. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So the next item is the state librarian. I don't know whether is she here, or are we going to go on screen?
She should be coming in first.
Okay. And then we have the UVM Leahy Institute for Rural Partnerships as our last item of the day. We did, Senator Vyhovsky and I meet at 12:30 with actually both Tim Devlin and Tucker.
I saw
Tim is
him.
back.
Very exciting.
I need to track him down, because I believe I own the app.
You don't.
Oh, I
So
think-
we have begun to put next week's agenda, and I believe Jillian gave you kind of a draft, so we can go over that.
Great.
Probably between the next two. Time-wise, we had an hour set aside for the state librarian. I don't know that we
No, they're gonna take
need
the
to do
full-
that much of a grilling.
Happy to.
So maybe between that and our final witness of the day, we can at least quickly go over what we might have planned for next week.
And don't leave Catherine without our discussing S16, which you seem to want to weigh in on,
Okay,
which is an economic development.
okay, thank you.
So please join us if you like, both of you, if you are that comfortable that way.
No, I think Kathy's gonna testify and like this.
You're back, yes.
Tom's
Okay.
back.
And so you are who?
So,
Assistant Librarian Thomas Murdo.
yes. Nice to see you all.
So we will go around the room and just, I always do it every day, but I think it helps to put a name to a face sometimes. Unfortunately, Senator Hart is not with us today. He must have gotten a little more seriously. I don't know. He had a cold yesterday and he said it was very powerful, and so he didn't make it today. But so let's start with Senator Clarkson.
Allison Clarkson, Windsor County District.
Brian Collmore from the Rutland District.
Jillian, the committee assistant.
Tanya Williams Beach in Central District.
And I'm Becca White and I'm from the Windsor County District.
And you are?
I am Catherine Solano. I also go by Kathy, and I'm the state librarian and commissioner of the Department of Libraries. And my colleague, Tom McMurdo, assistant state librarian, is here with me today.
Great. Well, welcome.
Thank you.
And we're at your disposal for the next however long you need to tell us.
Well, I heard from Secretary Clark that you were asking some questions about the Department of Libraries, and she may have shared some information with you already. So I don't want to be repetitive, but what I thought that I would do today is just give you an overview of what we do and why we do it and who we support. So the department has its role laid out for it pretty clearly in statute, and we serve all of the branches of the state government. We also serve libraries statewide and particularly provide support to public libraries. And we serve all Vermonters, some of them directly and some of them through their public libraries, academic libraries, or school libraries. The statewide services that we provide include access to the Vermont Online Library. That is a database through which Vermonters can access reliable, vetted information, including full text magazines, books, medical information, auto repair manuals. We've kind of got something for anyone in there. And there are also some small business resources in that collection. We also have an online learning portal, and the portal that we are currently using is called Udemy. That is a video-based learning platform. Our team, our information and access team, decided that they would really evaluate how Vermonters were wanting to use information. And we had a different platform in the past, but it was a little bit more expensive and it was more of an instructor-led platform. And what we realized is that people are much more into watching a YouTube video. So these are really a collection of training resources. I'm pretty sure you can learn the ukulele, but you can also learn how to make pivot tables and do all sorts of other things. So actually, our colleagues in other departments of state government have found Udemy to be really helpful. And it's a great resource for people who are trying to level up their skills for workforce reasons. And also people who just want to learn something new. It really does range from technical skills and computer science to like crocheting and baking. So you can kind of find everything there.
Senator Clarkson.
It's a pretty odd name, isn't it? Is it an acronym for something?
I'm going to turn to Tom. I think it's
YouTube.
I think
Well-
it's kind of like U Academy or something.
Yeah, it's like you,
Oh.
like University Academy. Yes.
God, okay, that makes,
So,
Yeah,
that
we didn't
makes-
you
name
know
it
how
that.
brain goes. It's just, it's the name of the.
does everyone, all of our public libraries have this as accessible?
Every library in the state can use this service, and my understanding is that it's actually authenticating based on your location here in the state of Vermont at this point.
You can do it here
Yeah.
in this room, so.
And if you would like, if you don't have a state library, I should have said this first, if you don't yet have a state library card, just let me know and we'll get you signed up for one, because you're all eligible for a state library card and direct service from us as your state library. So, and we would be happy to walk you through in more detail on a one-on-one, just kind of the resources that we have, so you understand what they are and how to use them.
Senator White.
That was mainly the questions I had and I'll just show you, I had such a good experience with the library folks. I got this book from you guys this year. So thank you. Everyone talks about Frank Ryan in this committee, so I thought I might as well read the book. But you guys have been really helpful in providing books literally delivered to me as a legislature via some magical process where they are delivered to me by page.
Let me tell you
So
about that.
I would, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
so
a library magic. I am here for library
It's
magic.
so magical.
have you seen there was a YouTube video with this man who was always spreading library love. And he was really, I think I'll send you.
I
the link.
would really
He's
love
great.
that. I have not seen it.
We need some joy. So.
Yeah, well, that's what he was doing. He was specifically spreading library joy, I believe. And I heard him speak last year and he was really quite inspirational. So what we do for you as legislators is that we will check out items to you that we have in our state library collection now. We have a really broad collection. We have, if you're interested in kind of obscure Vermont history, you want to conduct a seance just like they would have done way back, we've got a whole seance section. And, you know, their mentalism was huge in Vermont. So we have a Vermontiana section, which has reference materials and historical items that you might not find in other places. And we can circulate items to you from that collection. We also have been developing a public policy collection to really support folks. I think a lot of the things you might want to read related to newer publications would probably be in the databases. If there's ever an article you can't get your hands on, it's behind a paywall and you run up against it, that's something that we can actually use our interlibrary loan services to get you. So let me tell you about interlibrary. For you all, we're just putting something into the pink mail and it's coming over here. Pretty easy.
All the way from Barry.
All the way from Mary, yeah. But that's not really that far when you think about the fact that last year, the Department of Libraries facilitated the movement of 67,000 books to Vermonters through the interlibrary.
Their own libraries.
So
Library.
through interlibrary. So we have a statewide network of libraries that participate in interlibrary loan. Every library can participate in it, but 141 libraries are on a courier. The courier contract is held by the department and we coordinate and administer it. We support the libraries by paying for half of the cost of one weekly stop, which is in the realm of $680 for half the cost. So we make grants to them. It's important to note that we make those grants and we pay for databases with federal funds, at least in part. So those are Institute of Museum and Library Services, or IMLS, grants to states funds. And I mention that because if those funds were actually frozen or cut, that would have a huge impact on affordability for Vermonters, because our state doesn't have as many, our state's libraries don't have as deep of a collection as other states do. So we're actually a net borrower. We're up there with Washington, D.C. and North Dakota as one of the top net borrowers. So we're bringing books into the state. Those are all processed by Tom's team in information and access, and then they are moved to public libraries. So we move materials between two Vermont libraries, and that's done through the courier, but we also physically process the requests and physically process the materials that come from outside the state or from libraries that aren't in the courier network. So that's important work that our team is doing every day. And so that's a huge program, and it's a great service to Vermonters because we want everyone to be able to access whatever information that they are looking for.
Senator Yolski.
How many libraries are there in the state of Vermont?
We believe there are 187.
So most libraries participate in
Yes.
this program.
And our goal is eventually to have every library participate. Some of our libraries are so small that it is really difficult. And sometimes what libraries will do is they'll pair up with another library. So one library will be the spot that the courier comes, but somebody in a neighboring library may drive over on their way to work and grab books and then bring them. So there are ways that people can do that. And often that's how school libraries are participating, by having the books come to the public library and then they pick it up and down. Now, this is one reason that having a lot of libraries is actually beneficial to Vermonters, because the libraries can easily work together, have books brought nearby to people's homes. And this system is much more affordable than mailing the books to people, which is what was done in the past. There is book rate through U.S. Postal Service, but it's not as fast and it's not as affordable as this courier system. So there's an efficiency here of doing it at this scale. And there's a savings for communities by participating in this way rather than paying individually to mail items and then mail them back and forth. Another shared resource that all Vermonters can access is the Palace Project Act, which is Vermont's statewide ebook and e-audiobook program. It's a platform that Vermonters can use to access materials that the department has provided. What we do is we focus on perpetual license ebooks and e-audiobooks. The reason I make that distinction is that you might think that when a library buys a book, it's like buys an ebook or an e-audiobook. It's like when you as a member of public, a consumer buy it. That is not the case. When a library buys a book, it's really buying the license for that ebook or e-audiobook.
For X period
For
of time.
one,
For X, so you buy a license for one book for a limited period of time, 2 or 3 years, or maybe 25 uses, and a renewal. So if one of you, if you, if you checked it out and then you renewed it, that's 2. That's not that you're one person,
Okay.
it's 2 times. So the cost of providing modern, current bestsellers in ebook and e-audiobook format is really expensive for local libraries. We are wanting to be good stewards of public funds, and we don't want to buy something that's ephemeral with state or federal money. So we are focusing on perpetual license materials. And then that frees up funds for the other libraries, the local libraries, to be purchasing the one-time things. This is a topic that is a really challenging one because libraries, of course, are providing ebook, e-audiobook, digital materials, but there's also still a huge usage of the physical materials. And a person who doesn't have internet access or who doesn't have a device can't use the digital resource. And then it becomes a matter of really providing equal access to people. So we also know that ebooks are really useful for the people who are reading them at that time, but for students and for young kids, an ebook is not the best way for them to learn to read.
Mhm.
Tactile reading experience has been shown to be really important, and it's more sticky. I know that I mean that and like it sticks in my brain. So like for me, I could come in with a tablet, but I would be lost trying to speak with you and answer questions and look at notes. And that's kind of just a human experience. And so what we find is that students don't necessarily retain everything that they've read in the ebook format. So that's why it's important to have both physical collections and digital collections, and not necessarily to just provide one of those.
Senator Waite?
thank you, Mr. Chair. Honestly, I'm a huge library fan. My brother works at the Quechee Library.
Oh, wow.
My family started the Abbott Library and the Wilder. Like, we are library people. And one of the questions that has come up that Senator Clarkson has brought up quite a bit is the fact that adult literacy rates have gone not in the direction we want them to go.
You're anticipating my.
I know, I read into your mind, Allison. But do you track that as well? Are you noticing that? Because I feel like ebooks sometimes are there's concern that people are not necessarily reading, that they're audio hearing and learning information. Do you think that that's why people are moving to ebooks, is we're moving away from literally our ability to read or our literacy? And do you track that or have any?
I think it's a really interesting, I want to say thank you for being such a supporter of libraries. And thank you for asking that question. We don't track that in the department. We don't track adult literacy. There are libraries that have adult literacy programs. I used to work in San Francisco and we had an adult literacy program. And I think that that's an area for growth in libraries in Vermont. We're often very focused on early childhood literacy, which is an area where we still need to beef up what we're doing here in the state. And the department recently published a report on resources to bolster early childhood literacy for Senate and House education. But we haven't yet looked at adult literacy and what might be needed in that space. So that's not that I'm wanting another report, but that is an area that someone else may be more expert than us on, but there's certainly some library engagement around that, often with volunteer reading tutors.
And have you noticed with the increase of ebooks do you think that there are more folks who are moving away from traditional reading, or is this supplanting it? Or what, are there any trends that stick out to you in Vermont in relation to that?
I think,
While you're looking for that, I think we have a huge growth of people listening to books as they do the treadmill. As they do their exercise. No, seriously, as they exercise, as they drive. I mean, I consume a ton of books driving around the state, as you know. So I think it's because we have more opportunities for absorbing books in different non-traditional ways of in not being able to sit down and read, but you can listen to books in all sorts of different ways.
Okay, so your point is it's not that people are reading or becoming less literate, it's that we're using.
I
Oh,
think it's, from the people I know who use ebooks, that is definitely the why they use it.
See, at one point, I appreciate your view of that, but Kathy's pointed out, and it was interesting when you mentioned stickiness. And there are different generations, even in this room. And I've always sort of felt that when I pick up a newspaper and I can feel it, or a book, that I'm somehow gaining more ability to comprehend what I'm reading.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to explain it, but it seems like I remember it a lot better if I'm tactile about it rather than, and I've always found that sort of, I don't want to say it the wrong way, not annoying, but of concern, that a generation down is too busy this way. And I think they're missing something. I don't know how else to explain it.
it's an interesting thing, though, the generational aspect. I can check if we have more specific data, but what I've been flipping
There may be
through-
some national data.
Yeah, I think that there's national data on this, but as far as what we see in Vermont, the Department of Libraries conducts a survey that we hope every library participates in, but realistically about 150 libraries out of the 187 participates.
Pretty good.
And we have, we put out a report annually, and the most recent of those reports is with data from fiscal 23. And we have physical and electronic circulation combined in the data that I'm looking at in front of me. And there was a big dip during the pandemic. And what I wanted to share is that we're coming back out of that dip now. And, you know, it's hard for you to see this, and I'm not sure, did you receive any materials from me in advance?
Yes, we have
Take
this.
You got that.
We have this.
All right, there was another thing that I wish we had.
We do.
But yeah,
We did.
if not, I'll send it over to you.
Okay.
But this graph here shows the combined, you can kind of see the dip and then that we're nearing those pre-pandemic,
Oh, wow.
you know, that we're getting back up there again to the 2017 realm, which is great. And I think, you know, we're actually seeing this whole chart, this whole page is filled with those dips. So circulation is rising
Oh,
up
we do have
again. Oh, you do good. Circulation is going back up again. Program attendance is going back up. Library visits are going back up. And I think, when you're talking about the generational aspect of the younger folks are doing one thing and the older folks are doing another, I'll look for some research about that because it's actually not quite how we think it might be. I think it may align more with people driving or being at the gym. A lot of younger folks are opting for physical books.
And also
Yeah,
elders whose eyesight
With the big
is
print.
having challenges. I know that we have a huge book club. Yeah, anyway, I know that there are lots of older people who also become very dependent on ebooks
that's true.
and books on tape. So I know that my mother, in the last, who was such an avid reader for the last 5 years of her life, she was totally dependent on ebooks.
Well, let me share on that topic. Something that's wonderful with the ebooks is that they can be made
Before we just
larger.
leave his,
Yeah.
I just thought it would be great if we could, if there was any national data on retention, because I think what you're talking about is retention. Do we retain more if we read it physically? Or do we retain it if we hear it? And I think different learners retain it differently.
That's a
So
good point.
I would just be interested if there was
Yeah.
national data on retention.
Tom is noting it and we'll look for, I did see some data on that topic with younger readers specifically. I'll see what else we can find. This is a great reference question for our team. I do want to share something wonderful
sorry.
about, no,
I just want to finish on that.
this is such a great conversation and I love all the questions you're asking. It's hard to focus. The ebooks have an amazing feature, which is that they are more accessible than a standard print book. They have a built-in accessibility feature, which is you can expand the print, you can scale it on your digital device. And they often can be read to you. The readers are getting better. They're not the same as if a person read it to you, but the voices are getting better and becoming more fluid. And for those Vermonters who are blind or print disabled, and print disabled could be anything from a physical difference, their hands function in a way that it's hard to use a book or it's hard to hold up a book, or it could be a mechanical learning difference. There could be a diagnosis of learning difference that makes people eligible. You don't have to be completely blind for this service. One of the direct services that we provide through the Department of Libraries is that we provide people who are eligible with access to the National Library Services materials and collections and the devices to use those ebooks and e-audiobooks.
Yeah, that's right.
And so the ABLE library is what we call that special team of 3 people who work in our department. Again, like all of the full-time staff except myself and the executive staff assistant, the positions in the department are split funding wise. So the department is supporting service to Vermonters who need special materials, maybe Braille books, or the really vast collection of ebooks that far exceeds what we have in our Palace Project app. So the National Library Service has an enormous collection of materials, and we make those available to eligible Vermonters through our ABLE library. The staff who work in the ABLE library, their salaries are a mix of general funds and federal funds from IMLS grants to states. So when you think about if those funds were not here, the impact on the department staff would be, we would need to make a lot of decisions about programs.
Senator Class.
So when I mean ebooks, I mean audio books too. So not, because that's where I think a lot of people
Yeah.
are. I'm not just thinking of, because quite honestly, an ebook that you read is the same thing as reading a book. But I was thinking about audiobooks really
Yeah.
when you're talking about how do people learn and what do people pretend.
Yeah.
And that's what I think where there's a huge number of people growing in use of books and why book sales are up, quite frankly, is audio. But we used to pay for a service, and in this committee, you and I heard testimony about this a couple of years ago about a service that provided newspapers and journals to the blind and the disabled. And that money, I feel like, was cut. Do you remember this vaguely? And I think it was cut, and they were devastated. That whole community was devastated. Is that still the case, or is that what part of your staff are doing?
I'm not familiar with that specific program, but I know that through the network library, the ABLE library, which is a network library of the Federal Library of Congress program, the National Library Service, that people do have access to some periodicals and newspapers.
Yeah, this was every day. This was the newspaper.
Yeah.
This was.
Tom may
remember
be
there was-
able to shed more light on it. He's been with the department longer than I have.
My understanding is that was a volunteer service. That's the only thing that I'm familiar with, but there may have been a paid service where, and this is people reading that day's edition of the newspaper as an audio file that people could listen to. I think my brother subscribed to that at one point. My brother's blind, so that's what I'm familiar with. And for some reason, I'm thinking that's coordinated through the Lions Club, maybe, but not 100%.
Thanks. Speaking of magazines and people who need resources, one of the things that we do is to provide reading materials, including periodicals, to folks who are in the state psychiatric facilities. And we also provide materials. We're responsible through statute for providing materials to the 6 correctional facilities. We also serve the veterans home, and they primarily, like the psychiatric facilities, request that we send periodicals. So we have that institutional library collection responsibility. One of the things I wanted to talk to you about too. Oh, yeah,
Could I just ask on that, how actively used is it?
it's very actively used. The books are, well, we know that we purchase books, they're getting used. It's hard to tell from anecdotally from the information that we hear from folks in the corrections facilities who support the libraries, who are working in the libraries. There's quite a lot of circulation. I was up at the Northeast Correctional Facility, maybe 2 summers ago, bringing a big shipment of books. And I met a man who's incarcerated there who was doing all of this work on spreadsheets of keeping track of who gets the books next, moving the books around. So there is quite robust usage of materials. I think that it's hard to give exact usage metrics because they're doing it without an integrated library system catalog. And that's something we've talked with corrections a little bit about in the past, about maybe making it easier for them to do that service using an ILS. So that's something we've discussed with them, and also the idea of making it a little bit easier for people to access ebooks from our collections. So those are things that we're progressively working on, because what I noticed when I was at the correctional facility, and I understand a number of them are built in the same way, is that the library space is separate from the main building. And if there is a shortage of guards, then
It
people
just cuts
can't
off
get
access to
to
it.
it. So they have to kind of bring the guards into the building. So there can be access issues in those cases. And I know that during the COVID pandemic, there was significant access, and we actually used some of the ARPA funding from the Institute of Museum and Library Services to do a big infusion of materials. We spent over $80,000 on materials for the correctional facilities and delivered that. And it's our responsibility in statute, and we are currently budgeting money for that every year to maintain that big infusion of materials that we.
Just to tag on to your correctional facility support, do you actively work with CCV or any other academic institution that's providing classes to people within our correctional facilities?
We don't do that work.
Because that you
My
be
sense,
providing the course material work and
yeah, my sense is that the correctional facility academic aspect is managed by correctional facility staff, and there's somebody who's coordinating that, and I'm sure that Commissioner Dunn can answer questions about that, but we typically have a staff member who's a contact person. And I know when I was visiting that correctional facility that day, I saw tutors who were working with students. So I know that the work is happening. People are working at the facilities to some extent.
Senator White?
Thank you, Chair. I read a very disheartening article about the New Hampshire State Library and some of her positioning on certain books and what should be available to the average reader. And one of the things that I learned later was that she makes decisions about what is accessed by folks who are incarcerated in the New Hampshire system. So I'm wondering, I first of all, I'd love your opinions generally about access to books. And I know book banning comes up in other realms. So if you have any thoughts on that, but do you control, or does your agency control what books are available to those who are incarcerated?
We select the books. Our team selects the books. And we have information from corrections about the types of things that are able to be read in facilities.
Oh.
So there's a material on what people are able to read physically, because for example, we can only select paperbacks. So if an item is only out in hardcover, we get it in paperback. And there are some health and safety concerns around the hardcover books. And that's consistent. When I've worked in other states,
Okay.
that was a consistent decision with correctional facilities. Sometimes we'll select an item thinking that it's of interest. Yes, we take suggestions from the community that we serve in the facilities. We try to look at the lists of what other kind of best practices and what the collections are like. We get a lot of bestsellers that people are interested in. But we do also take individual requests, or sometimes the staff member in corrections who oversees that area. It's often like a recreational coordinator will let us know they're really interested in this or really interested in that, and that informs our selecting. We have occasionally bought items that are on kind of a no-go list.
Oh, wow.
So for example, we thought that lots of people had tattoos. When we visited, they might like tattoo books, but that's actually, there was a prohibition against that. So we had to remove that item because there could be gang symbols with the tattoos.
Oh.
I think that there are some, I think that corrections would be better to explain what those parameters are.
But that's
Yeah.
helpful because that's not in your purview. You're not making those decisions. I think they do it a little differently over there.
Yeah.
But
Well, I mean, we are selecting the items, but ultimately, if corrections decides not to let an item in, that's their facility and that's up to
okay,
them.
I understand.
Senator Bielski.
But there are, you don't set it, but corrections is absolutely limiting what people can and can't bring.
There is a framework that they've established. So there's a it's a difficult question to answer. Yeah, there are certain topics and certain themes that we would not purchase because they are not within the framework of what could be there. But there is quite a lot of access to materials for folks in correctional facilities, having looked at the list of what our team is purchasing and seen the books as we deliver them. I think that there's a good variety of things, and corrections would have to speak to any limits that are in place and where those limits come from.
Okay.
But in general, the Department of Libraries supports Vermonters of all ages and using materials. We really encourage people to have, to visit their libraries, find things of interest to them. We encourage libraries to have really broad collections that are consistent with the First Amendment of the Constitution, and also our state public accommodation laws. And we did a lot of work last session with what was then S220, now Act 150, to really help libraries with collection development policies, but also really importantly to set up a process for community members to raise challenges if they wish, if there's something that they're concerned is in the library, that there's an actual process for that, that it doesn't really challenge the institution of the public library. Just this week, losing track of what day it is because I'm here at this building so much, but I think it was on Monday. We had a webinar for public library directors, staff, and trustees, and we launched a model policy for collection development.
Oh.
So we reviewed that for them so that they can all comply with Act 150 and having a collection development policy and procedure for reconsideration in place. We don't want anybody to be caught off guard, and we don't want Vermonters to be jumping through extra hoops as they try to express their positions on books in the library. And so that's a best practice, is to have a collection development policy, and it needs to be consistent with existing laws in our state and in the country.
That is so reasonable.
But do you have an ask with that?
No,
No, it was a tell.
That's a good tell.
So in many instances, much like a general store or an elementary school, the library can be the center of a community, or at least a place where lots of people go to do various things, don't have to necessarily sit down and read a book. In Rutland, and I've always wondered why it was called the Rutland Free Library. I think there's probably good reason. I don't know how many other. Well, okay. But one of the things that I wanted to mention, and I don't think it's within your purview, many of them are aging, the buildings. Rutland is a key example of that. It began as, I think, a courthouse, actually. It was originally a courthouse. The city of Rutland owns the building, which is hundreds of years old, and leases it back to the library for $1 a year. Over the years, it has come to great disrepair. The heating system doesn't work the way it was intended. The roof leaks. There's ADA issues. So I'm just wondering, they're interested in moving. You probably are more aware of this than I am, but there's a proposal at least to move them into downtown Rutland. I mean, they're in downtown now, but down the street to the Asa Bloomer building, which I think is about half empty at the moment, so it's got some traction. I think there are people that feel passionately one way or the other. They're gonna leave a really historic building if they do, but there's also, as is always true, money involved, so it's gonna cost upwards of 10, 12, $15 million to rehab the building. They could probably move for less than that. There's an issue of parking, because once you get into that downtown area, anyway, I'm not hoping that you're gonna say, you know what, I'm watching that and I've got $10 million saved up for. I mean, that's talking too good to be true, but I do know that they've approached the federal delegation to try to help them out with some of that. And I didn't know, you mentioned 187 libraries, so how many others are in that same situation, or how many are newer and not facing those challenges?
Okay, you've asked really good questions, and I think it is in our purview at the department, so I think I can answer them. I'm very
Okay.
familiar with what's going on in Rutland. In fact, I was down there about 3 weeks ago for one of the series, they are doing a series of community meetings.
Right.
And I do not have a position on the Asa Bloomer building. That's not in my purview. As far as what I was doing at their meeting, it was just to talk with the community and share some modern library design principles, what they should be thinking about, layouts of buildings that work well for maintaining public safety, which is a big concern in their urban library setting, and challenges people face as they renovate. So I gave a presentation to them on that topic, and I'm aware that the department did receive a grant application from them in the past. We do have some federal funds that we are administering currently. To my knowledge, the exact fate of the Rutland Public Library is really, it's really with the community, what they decide to do. My recollection from talking with the library director there, Randall Smathers, who's a strong leader in Vermont libraries. He had mentioned that they did not receive the congressionally directed spending that they applied for.
Right.
And so my understanding is they're really like other libraries in the state looking to improve their libraries, maintain their libraries. And there's quite a large need for funding because these buildings, many of them are historic. The department conducted a study in 2023 related to public library needs. And of the 187 public libraries in the state, 117 completed the survey. The survey was not completed by architects or building evaluators, it was completed by librarians. They did their best guesses. So any numbers I say, please take them with a huge grain of salt.
Can we guess what the number?
Well, so for the library, how much do you think the actual need is for?
All of the libraries together.
The 117 that respond,
60 million.
I would say $1 billion.
60 million. A little up, a little down on you, a little up on me.
Because the school
$100
construction.
million.
6
100
billion.
million is the estimate that we came up
100
with.
I mean, bummer,
But
but yay.
But I want to qualify that. So of the libraries that responded, of the 117 that responded, not all of them filled in that cell. And basically this morning, thinking you might ask that question, I tried to get some data out of that cell. Some of them wrote a novel, some of them wrote a number. And these are very fuzzy, very fuzzy numbers. But this is, the 100 million number is a portion of what the 117 reported.
Yeah,
So
so it's a big.
it's a big
Yeah.
need. What's going on in Vermont's libraries is that, and this you can actually see in that second paper that I handed out, the average for the mean age, I think it is, of Vermont's libraries is quite old. Many of these libraries were built
In the 1820s.
over 100 years ago.
I guess.
Yeah, let me look at the actual number that we have here. The libraries that have responded to the public libraries survey, so again, that's a subset of libraries. Their ages, the ages of their buildings ranged from being built in 1781 to being built in 2021. in the working group report, you can see by county, the median age, I think it is, of the libraries in the county. Some counties have much older buildings. Chittenden County, where I grew up, much more recently renovated buildings or new construction.
So what's the average age of all of them around the state?
The average was 1912. Right, my colleague Josh, who does our data number crunching, he's going to correct me, I'm sure. I think that's the mean age, not the
Okay,
average.
doesn't matter, but that's.
But 1912 was quite a long time ago. So when you think about the things that need to be done at libraries, bearing in mind that if you have never had money to renovate your library, then you haven't renovated it since the Americans with Disabilities Act was created,
Oh.
and it hasn't triggered the need to comply with that act because you haven't renovated it. So of the libraries that responded to our survey, ADA compliance, to bring it so that it's actually compliant now. It's not that they're out of compliance, but bringing it to the minimum standards for now. 24% of the libraries that responded said they needed a ramp. 18% said they needed doors that were ADA accessible to give the push button. Restrooms, 15% of them said that they needed restrooms. 14% said that they needed an elevator. 10% said they had parking needs. So we're looking at quite a lot of need in that space. And then also people are.
So sorry, the pages are busy right now, so.
Oh, we owe her money.
Delivery.
President of the committee.
There are also folks who, bearing in mind what we've just learned through COVID and living through that in a public building, just like you all have been in this older building and the air
We got
circulation.
renovated. We got renovated.
But the air circulation, if you think about the only way to bring in fresh air in some of these buildings is to open a window, and how do you do that in the winter time? Replacing heat systems, 13% of the libraries that responded said that they needed new heating systems. 21% mentioned HVAC specifically as sort of separate than that. Air exchange, 6% of them were really focusing on that.
So huge needs. What are you doing about it?
Two things right now.
Because I think this is a major need with institutions for us
Yeah.
to figure out how we help our libraries. It has been for a long time. And some of them are owned by the town, some of them aren't, some of them are, but we need to help them all. And we need to figure out some kind of grant process or, bonding process for us to figure this
Well,
out.
the departments jumped in and you all supported us, the legislature supported us by dedicating some ARPA funding through Treasury for projects in libraries. So we are currently administering a grant of $16.4 million. And we have awarded those funds to 14 libraries in Vermont. $16.4 million sounds huge compared with our department's budget, but
Not when the need
numbers
is
a lot better than me, and it's not enough. So what we also did is when Senator Leahy's office was getting a lot of calls from libraries that were saying they wanted to submit for congressionally directed spending, they asked, would we be willing to administer a pot of money? And they had about $10 million in calls from small rural libraries. So we are also administering a $10 million grant program from HUD that was through the CDS process. This is all piecemeal. These are all federal funds. They're all on the list of things that are frozen.
Yeah.
So this isn't cash you haven't taken.
No. So these are programs that we're administering and that we are really excited to bring this infusion of funds to Vermont, but we also recognize it's not sufficient to meet the capital needs in communities around the state. And sometimes the libraries, like you were saying, Senator, the library is sometimes the last community space that they have. And in Vermont, our statute calls out a public library can also be the community center. And so that's a really
They are.
important facet for communities to have a place to be together and to have cultural programs. We're here today with other arts institutions tabling, and libraries are doing so much now. It's not just story time. It's not just a book club. There's so much cultural programming, so much
Job
civics
hunting.
programming, job skills. So
Senator Beals.
So I have a couple questions, and so to your point, because it's also social services are happening at our libraries, like our libraries in so many instances are the last place that you can go for free. And so I'm wondering about staffing. Are all of our community libraries open every day? Or like, I had a feeling I knew the answer to that. What does that look like across the state in terms of availability?
It looks like a couple of things. So, again, these are median statistics. Josh kindly put the word median at the top of the page. So as I give these statistics, they're median. The median is that they're open 31 hours per week. But anecdotally, I'll tell you that when I'm visiting libraries in rural communities or hearing from them, some of them struggle to meet the minimum standards that the department set in 1986 to be open 14 hours per week. So the department encourages everyone to have evening hours, weekend hours, times when people who work can come in. Some struggle with that still, but most are doing that. The staffing of libraries is really challenging. And I'd encourage you to look at the working group report on the status of libraries in Vermont, and specifically at the staffing and salaries survey that the working group commissioned.
It's way up.
Yes.
And
also benefits of libraries, even municipal libraries. There's some interesting data there. So about a third of the libraries are incorporated, the rest are municipal libraries. And the service is very different in different communities, even sometimes adjacent communities, and across the state, the service is very different. And so what we in the department are trying to do is to really support libraries in being their best selves. And I haven't talked about one really important thing that our team does and why it's so important to have the team of staff we have. Our team used to be much larger. It's currently 18 people plus 2. Yeah, you may remember, there were significant reductions in our staff maybe 15 years ago, 10 years ago. But at one point, the department had 6 regional libraries and was at the pavilion. We're now down to a very small team. And what the team does, one of our core functions, is to provide continuing education and training and professional support for librarians. In Vermont, I think it's about 15 to 18% of people who are working in libraries have a library science degree, a master's in library science. And the rest do not have that, and it is quite low compared to the national average. So our staff of trained librarians with degrees provides almost daily consultation services. And also we administer something called the Certificate of Health Librarianship. And we help to train library directors to do their job, particularly in small rural communities. If you come over here to the Lotta Hubbard Library in Montpelier, my home library, you'll find a number of librarians, I'm sure. If you were at one of the big libraries in Chittenden County, you would find that.
I mean, Woodstock, we have a
Woodstock.
very robust library.
Exactly. But
But the
small-
Abbott Library?
It's very difficult when you look at the salaries that are being paid to attract people with a master's degree from out of state. And we don't have an in-state master's degree program for library science.
Yes, Senator Bill.
My sort of follow-up to that is, then I imagine the staffing needs have changed. And of course, some of that is related to technology, but some of that I think is related to community need. I know that the Burlington Library recently got approval from the city to hire a social worker. And so I wonder what types of staffing need changes you're seeing in addition to just people, but like what type of people is not really the question I want to ask, but
What skills does
yes.
that mean? Yeah. Well, one of the key things that we're seeing is, and one that I really think we do need to focus on, is to get through to parents that the library is the place to go for early childhood literacy, that story time, that community of learners is really important. One of the things that we are focusing more on is early childhood literacy and training for people in that. There's a very rapid turnover of library staff. And so as soon as you train a children's services librarian, they may get a higher paying job in a daycare or in a school, and they go. Or sometimes we hear there was a library director I talked to down Pownell, I think she was in Pownell, and she was like, oh, she was doing great work. I was so amazed. It was a wonderful library, beautiful space, new, fresh, very enthusiastic human. And she told me that just as soon as I met her, she's like, oh, I'm leaving next week. I'm taking a job as a secretary in Massachusetts. I can get more money and I have to feed my family. So you have qualified people who are leaving the profession sometimes because of the low wages. So that's really challenging. So
Well,
that,
I mean, just on that, how many even have professional staff, let alone staff that have a library?
and I think, people can definitely learn these skills. And I think that libraries in Vermont that don't have professional staff many still have well-trained staff, and we help to support them with that. But I think that youth services component is really key. The social services piece can be challenging, because, and I'll say this from my own personal experience, which is not from serving people. I've never worked in a library aside from the state library, the Department of Libraries in Vermont, but I worked in San Francisco, which had the first social worker in the nation. When we had beds to put people in, she did an amazing job. She was in the office next to me. We were reporting stats of 200 people put in beds. If you don't have a bed, what are you giving them? You're basically managing their expectations. We used to just say to ourselves repeatedly, their emergency is not my emergency, to just try to get through the day. That was like the mantra that she taught me, to just try to fortify myself, because we're serving the public. This was working in the main library in San Francisco. It was very challenging. And so I think in some cases, a partnership with other agencies can be really helpful. In the largest libraries, embedding someone who has resources to give can be very helpful. But I don't think that simply sending and I have not looked deeply into the program specifically that they have in Burlington. They did consult on it, but I would caution against just putting social workers in place, because there's often a challenge of, is that social worker going to be a case manager, or are they going to be a referral service? And oftentimes you're working in a small community, like in my branch library experience in San Francisco. Once the people got helped by a social worker in the branch, there weren't necessarily new people with new needs coming in. So once you did what you could do for the people who still were going to be living outside after the library closed every night, well, then you've got a social worker with nothing to do for some hours. Or we had health and safety associates who were people who were formerly had been homeless, but now had moved into this position and were giving direct support. So there are different models, I think, that people can use. And it's definitely something that the department supports people in talking through, and happy to consult with them. But I don't think it's the silver bullet to know. And I think that we really need to find a way to, as a society, find a better solution for this, because it is the case that library staff are in a spot that's great. They are friendly, they are welcoming, they want to serve everyone, they should welcome everyone in, and we want to serve community members, whether they have a house or not, and we want the library to be safe for them and safe for everybody. And so I think that the opioid crisis has really impacted librarians' morale in the state, and I think we hear that it's an important thing to address. And so one of the things we do is to provide training and supports and continuing education, and just opportunities to talk sometimes about these things are often helpful. We do a lot of convening of conversations of, the large libraries meet every month, and libraries in different counties have meetings each month.
What constitutes a large library in your mind?
In our state, it would be like Rutland, Bennington, Brattleboro, Burlington. Oh, yeah.
The Kellogg, Hubbard.
Kellogg, Hubbard, yeah.
Probably most of the chicken county, like Essex.
Yeah, I think, I believe that they opt in to be in the large libraries meeting. We convene it, but if they are more medium but want to be large, or it's a lot of it is around like common interests and what they're dealing with too. Yeah.
Well, at the beginning, I said, I don't know if we'd be able to fill the hour, but Kathy, you've done a great job in doing exactly that. You and Tom. Is there anything else that we can help you with, or any committee members have questions?
And I have a list of questions, but we don't have time, so
Yeah.
I can
Okay.
circle up with
I
Kathy
think-
later.
I think we really need to focus on how we can work with institutions to actually find significant and how the bond bank maybe should be going to all your communities to figure out how we can bond for the renovation of these buildings, because I think for you to move out of that library is almost close to a crime. It'd be great to go move somewhere while it gets renovated.
I can't take.
But it's, no,
career other end.
but it's such a treasure.
But the Rutland Free Library actually has the authority and ability to put their own bond together.
Exactly.
They
They're a
don't need
town-
city permission to
They're
do
a
that,
municipal
so.
library. They could do that. So I think we need to figure out how we renovate our historic centers and Preservation Trust. I mean, it'd be great to get Ben Boyle working, thinking about this, and Michael Bond at Bond Bank, and
Yeah.
really.
Senator Mihosi.
I do have one question I want to touch on before you go, but I think we will be reaching on, and that is sort of, around library being a space where we expose people to different ideas, different cultures, and what that is looking like right now. Vermont is a very white state, and I think that our libraries are a critical resource for us to open our minds to different ideas and experiences. And so what is that looking like right now from your perspective and across the state?
Sure. Well, one of the things that's really important for everyone is there's a concept of, the book being a window and a door. And it's an opportunity for you to kind of look out and see others, invite others in. And I think that really the collections, I feel like the collections of libraries are becoming more diverse, more representative of our nation. And programming is really leaning in that direction too. I think that with more emphasis on programming and cultural programming especially, we're seeing more libraries are dedicating money to that activity. And it looks different in every community, how they implement it. The thing to always remember with libraries is everything is hyper local. I mean, I guess you probably know that every day in all of your work, everything for Vermont feels hyper local, but with all of those different library boards implementing and iterating, I think that the specifics of how it plays out are going to be different in each location, but we're really encouraging people to be inclusive and expansive when they're thinking about programming and to share ideas with one another and to see what's working for communities. And it seems like with the trends in library program attendance going up, I think that that's working really well. The same programs not going to work at every library, but certainly people are really kind of looking around and trying to make sure people can see themselves in the library. And I think that that's important. And, that can look very different at different libraries. I remember there was a working group conversation about should guns be banned in libraries, and one of the participants said, well, but we have a regular program where people learn gun safety. How would we ban guns in the library? And that's a local
library.
but that's their local activity. So I think that the way that things are going to play out is going to look different. But what we try to do is to provide people with resources, best practices, and access to materials. And we're very much in favor of the tradition of libraries. Our state was really out ahead with libraries, I think, and we really have a strong intellectual bent in our state with independent minds, and I think that's so important. And maintaining intellectual freedom is really key thing for all of us in this democracy.
Here.
Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank
Tom,
you.
thank you.
And when did you take over
I
from
took
Jason?
over, it's almost 3 years to the day.
Amazing.
I
Yes.
started on Valentine's Day, so it's like
It is
3
almost 3
years
years
this
to
week. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Congratulations. Thank you. I'm really loving being back in Vermont. And this, thank you.
I'm glad
Thank
that this job brought you back.
Got your report.
So committee, I will
Oh,
suggest that we take a 10-minute break, and our next witness I think is here, and with your indulgence, we'll be back here at, let's say, 1:15.